Good morning and welcome to Keeping Up With Conspicuous. We've got the brilliant James Wood with us today from Bowdark. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
That's all right. So today we're talking about James and Bowdark's journey, and we're talking about quite a unique space that Bowdark operated in kind of the SAP and Microsoft world, which is not very common at all. So yeah, we're going to talk a little about that, but. Yes, James, let's start with, as we normally do, with kind of your journey, your personal journey, and obviously that links pretty much, perfectly with Bowdark and kind of why you founded the company and kind of what it's all about and what you're looking to do at Bowdark, what you're looking to do for your customers.
Sure. Yeah. So I got started in the SAP space. You can probably see from my gray hair about 25 years ago. When I got started, I mean, this was right after the .com bubble burst, and so
Okay.
yeah, it was kind of an interesting landscape where this was slightly pre-cloud, but you were seeing movements in that
Okay.
direction. At least in terms of enterprise applications becoming more web focused, more distributed, more modular, best of breeds, which used to be kind of a dirty word in that space, became a little bit more the norm. And what was interesting is as I got more entrenched in that enterprise software space, the more opportunity I saw to kind of get outside of the normal. If you've ever worked around SAP, I mean, one of the biggest complaints you'll hear is user experience. It's kind of that. I mean, it's showing its vintage to some extent nowadays. With the desktop applications and all that implies. And so for myself, I felt like there were ways to take the good parts of a really well designed ERP and extend its reach in lots of different ways. So you had the advent of mobile applications. Let's get this stuff out into the field and let's extend the reach that way. And of course, more recently we've had the cloud and Industry 4.0 and all the different technology evolutions. Most recently, I guess AI. And along the way, it became, at least for us, so my wife and I started Bowdark back in 2006, and we saw an opportunity to, start to take some of the more modern technologies, that were coming up in the cloud and so forth, and apply that. Initially it was, largely SAP focused, but that story quickly pivoted into a larger enterprise play, because nowadays, as there's so many applications that orbit these customers. And so, we always kind of talk around here about, solar systems, and, SAP is in the picture, and it's, a very large constellation, and it has a huge gravity well, but, there's lots of other pieces. I guess my analogy gets a little tortured, but there are other
I get it. Yeah,
stars and planets in the picture. And so we've really been focused on process optimization. So it could be as simple as some UX modernization with something like Power Apps. It can be more in-depth process automation on the back end. Of course, agentic is becoming more and more a topic of conversation. But even data solutions, so we try not to lead too much with tech, even though we do live very deeply in that SAP, Microsoft, whatever the middle of that Venn diagram looks like. But it's more for us, a focus around that process optimization, and how can we find clever ways of applying technology to solve complex business problems, and hopefully and along the way help you get more out of what you already have. So I think a lot of customers that we work with, I mean, they've got heavy investments in a lot of these systems, and they're just not necessarily getting the full value out of their investments.
Do you find because I always think with SAP, or in particular SAP, because it's such a big product, that their customers are I guess for them to put in a new ERP is daunting, I'm assuming, unless they're making a lot of money. at that time and really, love stress. It's
Well, I mean,
probably not high on the agenda to do that. I don't
it's
know.
it's the classic, you know, core application that just has tentacles in so many different things. And
Yeah.
so, even if there was a shiny ERP that you could just rip and replace, there's the training, there's the change management, there's, in a lot of cases, customers have fully aligned their business processes to align with the way that, an SAP or some of these other ERP platforms handle common business processes. And so, it's a very daunting thing to figure out, how do I do this at scale? Of course, in the SAP world, it's been migration to S/4HANA for, going on almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very big undertaking. And I think, one thing we're seeing, Gartner coined that, composable ERP concepts, some years ago. And I think we're seeing that start to come to fruition in a lot of customers where sure their core ERP is over here, but strategically, can we innovate around the edges with supply chain and maybe lean into this other module over here and start to kind of compose together what the future looks like. And I think when the dust settles on those type of activities, now it's maybe not as daunting of a task to say, all right, we got to migrate everything. We've got a lot of the
Yes.
core pieces in place, and now it's we got to figure out what to do with finance and some of those core modules, which it's still a lot of work, but maybe less
Yeah.
than what was looking at before.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess you're right because you can. And I'm guessing the Microsoft stack is quite good at that, sort of like you're describing, almost that stuff. You're right. No one in their sane mind wants to kind of start again with an ERP implementation. So they can kind of
Yeah,
add something on the side and make it work that way.
yeah, I
They'd
think
probably prefer that.
Microsoft. I mean, the one thing that we've really loved about working in that ecosystem is just the agility that it unlocks.
Mm,
I mean, there's so many different solutions, and I think they've done a good job of providing customers and partners with tools to approach these problems in a lot of different ways. And I think you know even little things sometimes make a huge difference. I mean, there's always kind of been this partition that's existed
mm,
between the front office and the back office, and being able to bring some of those enterprise workloads into collaboration tools like Teams and Outlook and
mm,
other, of course, agents now. Um, that can have a significant impact on day-to-day productivity. And so, what's kind of
mm.
perceived as low-hanging fruit, it has that kind of expand flavor to it,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you have a few successes, and it's like, all right, let's see how far we can take this. And I think
Mm,
that's been a very interesting thing to see customers, kind of buy into that concept.
mm.
Whereas if we had this conversation 5 years ago, it's almost perceived as heretical.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
this
yeah,
very religious fervors
yeah,
around it, like you don't put a toe outside of whatever this vendor
yeah,
ecosystem is. And so yeah,
yeah. And I'm guessing again, my knowledge of SP world isn't amazing, but I'm guessing the vendors themselves have probably become a bit better at the top, haven't they, of working together on project. I mean, think that what you're saying as well. I agree. Like before, it was very much, there was probably less on the partnership side at the really high end level. They thought, well, we're SAP, we're Oracle, we're Microsoft. Don't, we're not going to
yeah.
work together on stuff. But
Well, and
that's
I think there was. I think a lot of those vendors had such interesting market share grasp,
true.
on some of this. I
Yeah.
mean, I've heard, sales reps talk about, calling up customers. This has been years ago, but it's,
Mhm.
do you run Salesforce? And yep, click. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, we're not
yeah,
going to displace that,
yeah,
and I think
yeah.
the same thing with a lot of these ERP systems. And now
Mm,
it's, yeah, there's, as software becomes more and more complex and these landscapes become more and more elaborate. I mean, I was reading a study not so long ago. It was talking about, I think the average enterprise runs north of 325 SaaS solutions. So a lot of these departments now
Wow.
have that autonomy to go buy that
Yeah.
one little piece of software that's going to be, their special sauce. And
Yeah.
it's hard to really get that territory grab the way it was 10 years ago.
True. And because do SAP, do they have? I mean, again, I'm more in the Microsoft, so I'm interested to learn. That kind of those tools, Power Apps and Power BI. And does SAP also have those kind of tools, or is they? I don't know what they have in that kind of realm.
Yeah, they're starting to. I think they're a little bit late to the game with the low code bit, but they're
Mm,
starting to build up some features there. And the interesting thing with SAP, and I think other vendors are going a similar route, is so they have their BTP cloud platform that effectively runs on top of hyperscalers like Microsoft Azure, AWS, GCP, et
okay.
cetera. So it's kind of a mixed bag of use our cloud platform. We have some SAP proprietary tools you can use, but you
Mm,
also have the option, if you're an AWS shop, for example, you can leverage some of those tools
mm,
as well. And so, it's turned into kind of an interesting battlefield where it's no longer a zero-sum game. I think for a lot of these
mm,
vendors, just being able to kind of you know wheedle their way
mm.
in to get
Yeah.
little different bits and pieces of it. But I think the challenge from the customer side, of course, is just standardization. And whether it's Microsoft or something else, I think the challenge becomes, let's say I have Salesforce, I have Workday, I have SAP, I have Oracle.
Mm,
I can't coexist in all of those ecosystems, at least to the level that you used to be.
yeah.
And so now it's like, okay, what is my core? If I'm an AWS shop, I'm a Microsoft shop, whatever, what
Mm,
sits in the middle of that, and how do I start to standardize skill sets and tools around that so that I can basically weave and compose the future of my
yeah.
enterprise landscape, with all the change that's constantly, I mean, especially in the last 18 months. I mean, the AI changes
Yeah.
alone, it's been
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's hard. Like what you mentioned earlier about those. If a company's got 325 products, you've also got a lot of licenses. And there's probably a lot of licenses for various products that you're paying for and not using. Or they aren't being properly used.
Yeah,
So,
that's been an interesting topic as well. I think, especially with low code, it is, before it was always, it's always cheaper to buy than it is to build.
mm,
Low code lowers that bar. Now, is it, I'm going to pay a little bit more to build it up front, but then I'm going to save on subscription and licensing costs on the back end. And so,
mm,
it's hard to figure out that exact ROI calculation, but it
yeah,
has
yeah,
changed the math a little bit. I think for a lot of customers to really think through, well, if I have so many of these SaaS solutions, the
yeah,
subscription costs really do add up.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I because I've spoken to a couple of customers where they've built something specific for their business, and actually they've then gone on to almost resell it because it's been very specific to their industry. But then they've gone, oh
Yeah,
right, well this is really good for, I don't know, healthcare non-profits or whatever, and then they can then go and kind of resell that piece of software on because it's been built and it works really well for them. And there's obviously other businesses that do the same. So yeah, I don't know. You've probably seen a bit of that as well, have you, with the low
yeah,
code stuff.
it's really a great opportunity for a lot of these customers to explore revenue streams that probably weren't anywhere on their radar.
Mm,
But, we do have this domain expertise. We do have some value here, and yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting to see that evolve as well.
Yeah. Oh, great. And what are you seeing customers talk about most of them? I mean, obviously you mentioned, the word that's on everyone's lips for AI, and what are you?
Yeah,
And obviously you can't do anything without talking about AI these days. So I mean, what are you seeing customers do on that front? Are you seeing it being widely embraced? Are you seeing a resistance still? What are you kind of seeing out there from customers?
yeah, I think it's, at least from our experience. I mean, it is real. I mean, it's
Mm,
generally the topic that customers lead with when we engage and talk through things.
mm,
Now, it may take some different forms. I mean, I think for us, data is kind of that 1B of we want to do AI, but our data estate is kind of in a state of flux, and we need to, maybe do some cleanup, or
Yes.
for customers that are maybe replatforming. So for us, Fabric has been a big part of our diet, if you will,
Okay.
and that's been an interesting opportunity to really bring that entire data estate underneath one roof, and what does that look like, and what does it potentially unlock for some of these AI initiatives, and so that's it is. I think it's definitely evolved from a point of curiosity to we've gone through some POCs, we've kicked the tires on this stuff, we see the value. There's still some hand wringing, I think, in terms of governance and security, and rightfully so. But
Yeah.
I get the sense that a lot of these customers are really ready to move. It's like, we get the value, we understand, we're ready to move past the POC phase. Let's really put this stuff to work. And I think they're looking for quick wins, just to prove that value out, and set a baseline for some pretty advanced projects. I mean, some of the conversations we've had, I think absent AI, I just don't think anyone would have even tried to tackle the level of complexity on some of these problems. I think that's been maybe the most interesting thing that we've seen, is just, we love solving complex problems. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like the, the
Yeah.
perfect storm for us. But
Yeah.
usually there's kind of a hesitancy for a variety of reasons to tackle those kinds of projects, because they're perceived as risky. And I think AI has maybe lowered that bar a little bit, at least in customers' minds.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, there's definitely, yeah, I agree. It's people are embracing it more and more, aren't they? And I think that we're seeing, I think a really interesting shift I've seen, which is a bit more relevant to us, but from a headcount standpoint, I feel like companies are suddenly, I think before there was a sort of line, wasn't there? Like, oh, it's fine, AI will never take your job. But I think now the talk from the people that matter, like people who are, is actually, yeah, it probably is. You're going to have to retrain in some capacity, because it could take your job. And I think that's sort of definitely a change I've seen this year, is that they're moving away from like they're sort of going down more that route, which is interesting, because they're trying to get that messaging right, which is tricky. But it's I've definitely noticed a change in that kind of tone.
Yeah, I think I think there's definitely some conversations around, what Microsoft, I think, recently released a study where they're talking about frontier organizations, and just this notion of, at some
Mm.
point we're going to have an org chart that's going to have agents sprinkled here and there. So it's not just a
Yeah.
traditional department. You have assistants, you have agents that are performing fairly complex research tasks, and so on and so forth. And I think while that does, of course,
Mm.
threaten jobs, it also, I think, gives customers an opportunity to rethink the way that they operate, and hopefully free up that team to do more productive things, and more challenging things. And it's, I'm certainly no
Mhm.
economist, but I think history has shown that a lot of new tech innovations tend to create more jobs than they take away at the end of the day. And there's a lot of state of flux in the midst of that shift and that transition. But
Mm.
I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that evolves, and what this unlocks, because at least in my own personal day to day, make heavy use of these agents, and it has freed up literally hours in my week,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
to do other things that I never
Yeah.
had time to get to. And those backlogs, I mean, every department has them. And so
Mm.
what does the world look like when you have time to finally get to that backlog?
Yeah. 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 What do we do with it all? Yeah, I think that, yeah, I agree. I think it's sort of that time assessment, isn't it? And working out what you can do with these agents, because everyone has tasks that they repeat. So the, there will eventually there'll be something for pretty much everything, which will
Yeah.
give you time to do all the non-repetitive stuff. the creative stuff, the thinky stuff. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's funny. We were talking with a customer the other day, and a big focus for them is generational knowledge transfer. And of
okay,
course, with the
yeah.
pandemic and everything, here recently, I mean, turnover is a very real problem,
Mm,
and it's one thing to say, we've got our SOPs and we've got our training guides and our manuals and so on and so forth, but
mm,
I mean, the reality is every time there's that shift and that transition, a
mm,
little knowledge walks out the door, and
yeah,
maybe a lot of knowledge. And,
yeah.
uh, I don't know how practical it is at the end of the day to train agents in the same way that, we've thought about this historically, but
Mm,
it is an interesting idea to consider the ability to take this knowledge and actually apply it and have it, create these agents and, be able to download institutional knowledge in ways that we've just never been able to do it before. It's one
mm.
thing for me to hand you a guide and, I don't know, did you read that guide? Did you
Yeah,
flip through a few
yeah,
pages
yeah,
and, toss it aside? I mean, that's,
yeah,
human beings just have that tendency to maybe not be quite as
yeah.
thorough. And so, yeah, it's interesting to think about.
That is interesting. Yeah, no, yeah. Because again, the old, someone leaves, they leave, or the knowledge leaves. You do an exit interview for an hour or half an hour, try and find out you know what the pain points were and what they're doing. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of knowledge that isn't fully given, and
Sure.
because they're in, I suppose if someone leaves, they're probably not that incentivized to spend hours and hours and hours putting that all in. But so there's probably a piece in kind of getting that human incentivization piece right there as well. Because when someone leaves at the time, they're probably not going to be, oh, I'm going to put all my knowledge, all my efforts into this because I don't know, someone's about to retire. They might be thinking, well, I'd rather
Right.
you know, do
Well,
something else.
as a lot of these AI models, the reasoning capabilities increase, I think they're potentially able to dig deeper than, as a software developer, or software
Mm,
consulting firm. We go in, we'll do, sit over the shoulder and walk arounds and, work with customers, give me a day in the
mm,
life. What does that look like?
mm,
But very frequently they'll walk us through the process. But if you're actually sitting over the shoulder, yeah, oh, but you did this. Why did you do that? And it's just this thing that people have a
mm,
tendency to, oh, it's because, and they just take certain things for granted,
mm.
and that knowledge very rarely gets translated. It's just the stuff that's in your head, and
Yes.
the reasoning capabilities of these models may be able to go a little bit deeper in some of that as well. To okay, but I noticed some of the time you do it this way, and why is that? And that process mining aspect. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That is definitely, yeah. Well, there you go. There's a case. There's product for someone to build, isn't there?
yeah, yeah, plenty of opportunity for ISVs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely something in that for sure. Trademark pending from James. So, but yeah, oh great. Well, and to tell, I mean, in terms of, so I mean, Bowdark. I mean, what's kind of the vision for the next couple of years? What are you thinking? Where are you seeing Where are you seeing customers pushing? What do you think you are going to be helping customers with most over the next few years?
For us, I mean, like everybody, we're talking about AI and what it's
Hmm.
going to change, and we're looking at opportunities to improve our productivity and our
Hmm.
capabilities. But I think from a customer delivery perspective, I don't know that it really fundamentally changes things, other than just allowing us to do even more with less. Can
Mm,
I come with a very focused team, leveraging some of these tools? Can we create some economies of scale that just weren't there
mm,
before, and hopefully entice customers to dig deeper? I mean, there's so much meat on the bone, and every single problem is kind of has the potential to be a mini project, and there's always
mm,
the is the juice worth the squeeze on this particular automation? It
Yeah.
is a pain point. We are aware of it, but I don't know. Do we want to tackle it yet? I
Yeah.
think some
Yeah.
of those conversations will change, here in the next couple of years to the point that, yeah, this is attainable and there is value and we can get to value into the hands of the business maybe sooner than we could have ever dreamed of even 5 years ago. And so,
Mm.
for us, that's the big focus is just trying to do more and continue to push the boundaries on this kind of crazy Don Quixote-esque journey of ours, trying to we're on a mission to optimize. So,
Yeah, no, it's exciting times, isn't it? There's lots of plenty of work to get everything solved. So it's yeah, it's going to be busy, I'm sure.
yeah,
So
I mean, what was the study? 8 billion apps between now and 2027 was
oh,
the
really?
forecast.
Wow,
It's a lot of
wow,
apps.
it's a lot of apps. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of work to be done. So great. Okay. And so tell me, and what we always ask at the end of this as well is because I know that you love technology and maybe your answer will be technology, but if you weren't doing what you were doing and you were doing a different job or career, what would you be doing? What would James be up to if
Hmm.
you weren't at Bowdark?
So my hobby, I suppose, I really enjoy cooking, and I
Okay.
don't know that would ever take me into the restaurant business, but that's a headache I'm not sure I'm I'm up for, but I do very much enjoy that, and so it'd be either that or just wandering around and annoying my wife. So I'm probably gonna stick with the former.
Well, if you're cooking, she probably wouldn't be annoyed, to be fair. So
Yeah,
she'd probably
that's a
be
good
happy,
point. Yeah.
delighted. Oh, brilliant! Well, thank you so much for coming on today, James. And yeah, to anyone that's watching, anyone that wants to speak to James or speak to James what Bodak does, particularly if maybe you're in that SAP Microsoft space, then reach out because they're doing some really cool stuff and like they're really improving and optimizing processes across many businesses. So yeah, definitely reach out to James and his team, and yeah, and we'll put some links, to get you to the right places. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on today, James. Lovely to have you on the podcast.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week.